The quiet departure, the grand hall of the Galactic Assembly, stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian floor. Above it floated the Eternal Sphere, a massive holographic display showing the 12,000 star systems that made up the civilized galaxy. Representatives from 83 different species filled the chamber, each sitting in zones calibrated to their specific atmospheric needs. The Zinthra breathed methane in their sealed pods. Thick reolith floated in gravity wells adjusted to their massive forms. The Corvithi stood in pools of liquid nitrogen that kept their crystalline bodies from overheating. And near the eastern edge, in a modest section requiring standard oxygen atmosphere, sat the human delegation. Commander Rachel Stone had represented Earth in this chamber for 9 years. She had watched proposals pass and fail, had seen alliances form and crumble, had witnessed the intricate dance of galactic politics from her designated seat. That seat was positioned in the outer ring, far from the central dais where the Prime Council conducted business. It was a position that reflected humanity's status in galactic society. Newcomers, recent arrivals, a species that had only achieved faster than light travel 300 years ago, while others had been exploring the cosmos for tens of thousands of years. Rachel looked at the data streaming across her neural interface. The proposal before the assembly was straightforward. A rogue asteroid cluster was on a collision course with the Velthran system. 17 billion Velthrani lived on 3 planets in that system. They had 6 months before impact. The solution required a coordinated effort using gravity tethers to redirect the asteroids. Humanity had developed the most advanced gravity manipulation technology in the known galaxy. Human engineers had used it to move entire moons, to stabilize dying stars, to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe. Rachel's team had worked for 4 months on a comprehensive plan. They had mapped every asteroid, calculated every trajectory, designed a network of gravity tethers that could redirect the entire cluster with minimal energy expenditure. The plan would save 17 billion lives. It would cost relatively little. It could be implemented within 3 months. Leaving a comfortable safety margin. She had submitted the proposal 5 weeks ago. Today was the vote. High Chancellor Vexroth presided over the session. He was Zinthra, a species known for their mathematical precision and their long memories. Vexroth had led the assembly for 4 centuries. He embodied the old ways, the ancient hierarchies, the unspoken rules that governed galactic civilization. His voice resonated through the chamber's translation matrix, reaching every species in their native language. We now consider the matter of the Velthran asteroid crisis. Multiple solutions have been proposed. We shall hear from each delegation. The Krelith presented their plan first. It involved using massive kinetic impactors to shatter the asteroids. The debris would still hit the Velthran system, but smaller pieces would burn up in the atmosphere. Probably, the Krelith admitted there was a 38% chance of catastrophic damage, even with their approach. The Corvithi suggested evacuating the Velthran system entirely. Moving 17 billion people would take years and cost trillions, but it was theoretically possible. The Velthrani themselves had no solution. Their technology was not advanced enough for this scale of problem. They sat in their delegation area, their bioluminescent skin flickering with fear patterns. Then it was humanity's turn. Rachel walked to the speaker's platform. She had done this hundreds of times, but today felt different. Today felt final. She presented the human plan with calm professionalism. She showed the gravity tether network, demonstrated the simulations, explained the timeline and resource requirements. The evidence was irrefutable. The human solution had a 99.7% success rate. It would save everyone. It would cost a fraction of the alternatives. When she finished, silence filled the chamber. Then High Chancellor Vexroth spoke. The Assembly thanks the human delegation for their enthusiasm. However, this crisis requires proven technology and experienced leadership. Humanity's gravity manipulation techniques are impressive for such a young species, but this situation demands certainty. We cannot risk 17 billion lives on untested methods. Rachel felt something cold settle in her chest. Our methods have been tested extensively. We've successfully completed 47 gravity manipulation projects across the galaxy. The data is available for review. 47 projects over 3 centuries, Vexroth said. The Kreolith have conducted gravity research for 12,000 years. Their experience speaks for itself. The vote proceeded. The Kreolith plan was approved by a significant majority. The 38% risk was acceptable to the Assembly. The human plan, with its 99.7% success rate, was rejected. Rachel returned to her seat. Her assistant, Lieutenant James Park, stared at his console in disbelief. "They chose the plan that might kill billions," he whispered. "They chose it because it wasn't ours." Rachel said nothing. She was remembering 3 years ago, when human doctors had developed a cure for the morphing plague that was killing millions of Dromoth. The Assembly had delayed approval for 8 months, while Corvithi scientists verified the research. 8 months during which 2 million Dromoth died. When the cure was finally approved, the Corvithi were credited as co-developers, despite contributing nothing. She remembered 5 years ago when human mediators had prevented a war between the Talvex Confederacy and the Harn Empire, a war that would have devastated 12 star systems. The peace treaty was celebrated across the galaxy. Human diplomats were not invited to the signing ceremony. She remembered 7 years ago when human agricultural specialists had ended a famine on 9 worlds. They had introduced crop rotation techniques and soil regeneration methods that transformed barren planets into breadbaskets. The Assembly had acknowledged the achievement in a footnote of their annual report. 300 years of this. 300 years of humanity giving everything and receiving nothing but condescension in return. 300 years of being the helpful children, always eager to please, always hoping for a seat at the adult table. Rachel made her decision. She accessed the Galactic Compact, the founding document of the Assembly. Article 73 was clear. Any member species could withdraw from the Assembly with proper notice. She drafted the message carefully, legally, and irrevocably. Then she stood once more. "High Chancellor, I invoke Article 73 of the Galactic Compact. Humanity hereby withdraws from the Galactic Assembly. We will remove all human personnel from Assembly operations within 120 days as specified in the Compact. This decision is final." The chamber erupted, not with alarm, but with laughter. Vexroth's translator conveyed his amusement clearly. "Commander Stone, your species is understandably disappointed. Young species often react emotionally to setbacks. Return to your seat. We will discuss your concerns at a more appropriate time." "There is nothing to discuss," Rachel said. "The withdrawal notice is filed. It is legal and binding. Humanity is leaving the Assembly." She transmitted the formal documentation to every delegation. Legal, proper, and final. Vexroth examined the document. His amusement faded slightly. "Very well. If humanity wishes to isolate itself, that is your choice. Perhaps time alone will teach your species maturity. The Assembly acknowledges your withdrawal notice. We move to the next agenda item." Just like that, 300 years ended. The Assembly continued its business. They had already forgotten about humanity's announcement. Rachel walked out of the chamber. Behind her, 83 alien species discussed trade agreements and border disputes, and all the ordinary business of running a galaxy. None of them understood what had just happened. None of them realized that everything was about to change. Asterisk that night, Rachel sent encrypted messages to every human facility in Assembly space. There were thousands of them. Humans worked everywhere, doing everything. They maintained the power networks that supplied energy to 6,000 worlds. They staffed the medical centers that treated 100 different species. They operated the agricultural stations that fed billions. They taught in universities, researched in laboratories, built in shipyards, healed in hospitals, and solved problems everywhere they went. The message was simple and clear. Article 73 has been invoked. Humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Assembly. All personnel are ordered to begin immediate and orderly evacuation. You have 120 days. Complete your current assignments. Train your replacements thoroughly. Leave detailed documentation. Be professional. Be courteous. And then come home. We are done serving those who do not value us. Across the galaxy, humans read the message. Some were shocked. Some were angry. But most felt something else. Something they had not felt in a long time. Relief. Dr. Marcus Webb was working in the Zinthra Prime Medical Complex when he received the message. He had spent 12 years there, developing treatments for diseases that affected methane-breathing species. His Zinthra colleagues were polite but distant. His breakthroughs were always credited to the facility rather than to him personally. He looked around his laboratory and smiled. Engineer Sarah Chun was maintaining the gravity stabilizers on Station Kepler 7 when the message arrived. She had been there for 15 years. The station would have collapsed into its host star 6 times without her interventions. She was paid well, but never thanked. Her innovations were always attributed to the station's Krelith director. She began writing her handover documentation with a sense of liberation. Teacher Daniel Cross was educating young Corvathy about quantum mechanics at the Crystal Academy when he learned of the withdrawal. He had taught there for 8 years. His students learned well, but he was never allowed to attend faculty meetings. His curriculum suggestions were always ignored. He finished his final lecture and started packing data pattern repeated across 12,000 star systems. Humans began their quiet departure. They did not sabotage anything. They did not rage or protest. They simply began the professional work of leaving. They finished their projects. They wrote comprehensive instructions. They trained their replacements as thoroughly as time allowed. They fulfilled every obligation with dignity. But they were leaving. All of them. In the assembly chamber, High Chancellor Vexroth barely thought about humanity's withdrawal. It was a tantrum, an emotional outburst from a young species that did not understand how galactic politics worked. They would return within a year, apologetic and humbled. They needed the assembly more than the assembly needed them. Their economy depended on galactic trade. Their colonies relied on assembly infrastructure. They would be back. Vexroth turned his attention to more important matters. The Velthran asteroid crisis required immediate action. The Krelith plan would be implemented next month. It might work. It might not. Either way, it was not humanity's concern anymore. Across the galaxy, the first human ships began departing. Small transports at first, carrying personnel from minor installations. The aliens who worked alongside them barely noticed. A few individuals felt genuine sadness. Most simply accepted new assignments and moved on. Humans had always been there, in the background, doing necessary work. Now they were not there. The galaxy would adapt, but adaptation was going to be harder than anyone expected. Because humanity had not just been doing necessary work. They had been doing essential work. Work that no one else knew how to do. Work that no one else could do. Work that everyone had taken for granted. And in 120 days, all of that work was going to stop. The unraveling. The first 30 days of humanity's withdrawal passed quietly. Ships departed on schedule, carrying human workers back to their own systems. The galaxy watched with mild curiosity, but little concern. The assembly continued its business as usual. High Chancellor Vexroth had been correct about one thing. The galaxy would adapt. What he had not anticipated was how painful that adaptation would be. Dr. Marcus Webb had spent his final 2 weeks at the Zinthera Prime Medical Complex training his replacement. A young Zinthera physician named Vexel was assigned to take over the infectious disease research program. Marcus showed him everything: how to culture the samples, how to analyze the genetic sequences, how to predict mutation patterns in methane-based pathogens. Vexel was intelligent and attentive, but Marcus could see the gap in understanding. Medicine was not just protocols and procedures. It required intuition built over years of experience. It required the ability to see patterns that were not yet obvious, to make connections between seemingly unrelated symptoms, to think creatively when standard treatments failed. On his last day, Marcus reviewed the active cases one final time. There was something bothering him about patient cluster 9. 17 Zinthera, showing similar symptoms across 3 different cities. The standard diagnosis was corrosive lung syndrome, a common methane breather ailment. But something felt wrong. The progression was slightly different. The response to treatment was not quite right. Marcus spent 6 hours running additional tests. He found it: a new pathogen. Not corrosive lung syndrome at all, but something related. Something that looked similar, but required completely different treatment. He documented everything and gave it to Vexel. "This is critical," Marcus said. "These 17 patients need the modified treatment protocol immediately. And you need to screen for this new pathogen in all suspected corrosive lung cases. It is going to spread." Vexel examined the data with his triple eye cycling through different visual spectrums. "Your analysis is thorough, Dr. Webb. However, I must consult with the Senior Medical Council before implementing a new protocol. Standard procedure requires peer review." "There is no time for that," Marcus said urgently. "These patients will die within 48 hours without the correct treatment." Vexel's skin patterns showed polite disagreement. "Our medical protocols exist for good reason. We cannot simply abandon them based on one physician's intuition, even a human physician. I will submit your findings for emergency review. The council will decide within 1 week." Marcus wanted to argue further, but his transport was leaving in 3 hours. He had no authority here anymore. He gave Vexel one last warning and departed. As his ship lifted away from Zinthera Prime, he wondered if those 17 patients would survive the week. They did not. 6 days later, all 17 died. The Senior Medical Council had still been reviewing Marcus's findings when the deaths occurred. By then, the new pathogen had spread to 43 more patients. Vexel tried to implement the modified treatment protocol, but he misunderstood a critical step. The treatment was only 30% effective instead of the 95% success rate Marcus had achieved in his preliminary tests. The pathogen continued spreading. Within 3 weeks, 6,000 Zinthera were infected. Within 6 weeks, the number reached 200,000. The Zinthera medical establishment threw all their resources at the problem. They replicated Marcus's research, but they kept making small mistakes. Mistakes that a human physician with 12 years of experience would have caught immediately. The death toll climbed. On day 45 of humanity's withdrawal, something failed on Station Kepler-7. The gravity stabilizers that Sarah Chun had maintained for 15 years began showing irregular fluctuations. The station's new chief engineer, a Krelith named Thorvax, ran diagnostics. The readings made no sense. The stabilizers were operating within normal parameters, according to all instruments, yet the gravitational field was definitely fluctuating. Thorvax spent 2 days analyzing the problem. He consulted the technical manuals. He reviewed Sarah's maintenance logs. Everything seemed correct. He decided the fluctuations were minor and probably temporary. He was wrong. The fluctuations were not minor, and they were not temporary. Sarah had developed an intuitive sense for the stabilizers after 15 years of working with them. She could hear when something was wrong, could feel it in the slight variations of the gravity field. She had been making constant micro-adjustments that never appeared in any log because they were too small to trigger official maintenance reports. Without those adjustments, the stabilizers began drifting out of alignment. Slowly at first, then faster. On day 60 of the withdrawal, the main stabilizer failed catastrophically. Station Kepler-7, home to 40,000 residents, began falling toward its host star. Thorvax and his team worked frantically to restore stability. They followed every procedure in Sarah's documentation. But the documentation could not capture 15 years of experience and intuition. They managed to engage the emergency stabilizers, but the process took 6 hours. 6 hours during which 40,000 people believed they were going to die. The station was saved, but barely. 3 people died of heart failure from stress. 17 more were injured in the panic. And the primary stabilizer was permanently damaged. It would take 8 months and enormous expense to replace it. All because Sarah Chun was no longer there to make her invisible micro-adjustments. Similar problems began appearing across the galaxy. Power networks experienced unexplained outages. Water purification systems produced contaminated water. Agricultural stations reported mysterious crop failures. Communication relays developed interference patterns. Transportation systems suffered delays. Each problem seemed minor at first. Each had a simple explanation: equipment aging, normal fluctuations, statistical variation. But the problems kept multiplying. On day 70, the Velthran asteroid crisis reached its critical phase. The Krelith implementation team began deploying their kinetic impactors. The first 3 impacts went perfectly, shattering large asteroids into smaller fragments. Then the 4th impact went wrong. The calculations were slightly off. The asteroid did not shatter cleanly. Instead, it fractured into several large pieces that maintained dangerous trajectories. The Krelith team scrambled to recalculate and adjust. They deployed additional impactors, but each adjustment created new problems. The asteroid cluster was now more unpredictable than before. On day 85, the first fragments hit Velthrani 3, the outermost planet. The impacts were not supposed to happen for another month, but the Krelith miscalculations had accelerated several trajectories. 15 fragments struck the planet's northern hemisphere. Each fragment was small, only 20 to 30 meters across. Small enough to mostly burn up in the atmosphere. Mostly. 3 fragments reached the surface. The impacts killed 6,000 Velthrani. Not the billions that a full asteroid strike would have killed, but 6,000 people who would have lived if the human plan had been implemented. The Velthrani government issued a formal protest. The assembly expressed regret, but maintained that the Krelith plan was still the best option. More impactors were deployed. More miscalculations occurred. By day 90, the asteroid cluster was in complete chaos. Fragments were heading toward all 3 Velthrani planets on unpredictable trajectories. The best-case scenario now involved evacuating the 2 smaller planets entirely and hoping the main world could survive the impacts with massive casualties. High Chancellor Vexroth called an emergency assembly session. "We face unprecedented challenges," he announced to the gathered species. "Multiple crises across our civilization require immediate attention. The medical emergency on Zinthra Prime continues to escalate. Station Kepler-7 nearly fell into its star. The Velthran situation has deteriorated beyond initial projections. These are difficult times, but we will overcome them as we have overcome challenges throughout our history." But privately, Vexroth was beginning to understand something terrifying. These were not separate crises. They were all connected. They were all the result of humans being gone. A junior analyst named Crix, a Corvathy with a talent for pattern recognition, had compiled a comprehensive report. It documented every major system failure since humanity's withdrawal began. The correlation was undeniable. Systems that humans had maintained were failing. Projects that humans had managed were collapsing. Problems that humans had solved were reappearing. Crix's report included a particularly damning section. It listed human contributions to galactic civilization over the past 50 years. The list was staggering. Humans had maintained 73% of the galaxy's medical research programs. They had operated 61% of critical infrastructure maintenance systems. They had managed 82% of agricultural optimization projects. They had staffed 57% of educational institutions. They had conducted 91% of emergency repair operations. The numbers went on and on. Vex Roth read the report 3 times, each reading filling him with deeper dread. Humanity had not been helpful assistants in the background. They had been the backbone of galactic civilization. And now that backbone was gone. On day 100, the Assembly attempted damage control. They sent diplomatic envoys to human space, requesting negotiations. The messages were polite but urgent. Perhaps humanity's withdrawal had been premature. Perhaps there was room for discussion. Perhaps arrangements could be made. Commander Rachel Stone received the envoys at the border station humanity had established. She listened to their speeches about mutual cooperation and shared futures. She heard their carefully worded suggestions that humanity might have acted rashly. When they finished, she responded with calm professionalism. Humanity withdrew from the Assembly legally and properly. That decision is final. We bear no hostility toward any species or the Assembly itself. We simply will no longer participate in a system that does not value our contributions. We wish you well in solving your current challenges. The lead envoy, a Kreolith diplomat named Varthos, tried a different approach. Commander Stone, surely you can see that the galaxy needs humanity. The current crises demonstrate how valuable your people are. Return to the Assembly, and we will ensure your contributions are properly recognized. Rachel smiled sadly. 300 years ago, that recognition would have meant everything to us. We would have been grateful for a kind word and a better seat in your chamber. But we spent 300 years proving our value while being treated as inferiors. We cured your diseases, fixed your infrastructure, taught your children, and solved your problems. And you never once said thank you. Not really. You tolerated us. You used us. But you never respected us. She stood, indicating the meeting was over. We are not angry. We are not seeking revenge. We are simply done. You will solve your problems, or you will not. Either way, humanity will not be there to help. We have our own civilization to build now. The envoys returned to the Assembly with Rachel's message. Vexroth received it in his private chambers. For the first time in 4 centuries of leadership, he felt genuine fear. The galaxy was unraveling, and there was no solution in sight. On day 110, the Zinthera pathogen had infected 3 million people. Station Kepler-7 remained stable, but required constant monitoring that its crew barely understood. The Veltheran system faced certain catastrophe within 3 weeks. Agricultural failures had created food shortages on 47 worlds. Power outages were occurring daily across 800 systems. Communication networks were degrading. Transportation systems were failing. The Assembly's carefully ordered civilization was collapsing. And in human space, behind borders they had sealed, humanity watched. They felt no satisfaction in the chaos. There was no joy in seeing others suffer. But there was resolve. They had given the galaxy 300 years. They had been patient, helpful, and endlessly optimistic that someday their contributions would be recognized. That day had never come. So now they focused inward. Human colonies flourished with the expertise previously given to aliens. Human research programs advanced rapidly. Human infrastructure became the most reliable in known space. Human medical centers achieved breakthrough after breakthrough. Human agricultural systems produced abundance. All the talent, all the innovation, all the dedication that had been scattered across the galaxy was now concentrated on humanity's own worlds. The effect was transformative. On day 120, the final human ships crossed into human space. The withdrawal was complete. Behind them, they left a galaxy struggling to function without them. Ahead of them lay an uncertain but dignified future. The assembly sent one final message. Not a negotiation. A plea. High Chancellor Vexroth recorded it personally. His voice had lost its condescending tone. We understand now what we failed to see before. Humanity was not a minor species serving in the background. You were essential. You were irreplaceable. We took your contributions for granted and treated you with disrespect. This was wrong. We ask humbly for your forgiveness and your return. Not as subordinates, but as equals. Please. Rachel listened to the message in her office on Earth. She thought about Dr. Marcus Webb, who could have saved millions of Zinthra if anyone had listened to him. She thought about Sarah Chun, whose intuition had kept Station Kepler 7 stable for 15 years. She thought about Daniel Cross and all the other teachers who had educated alien children while being excluded from faculty meetings. She thought about the countless humans who had given everything and received nothing. She composed her response carefully. High Chancellor Vexroth, humanity accepts your acknowledgement of our contributions. We bear no ill will toward the Assembly or its member species. However, we will not be returning. We spent 300 years seeking your approval. We finally realized we do not need it. We wish you success in rebuilding what has been lost. Farewell. The message was final. The door was closed. And across human space, millions of humans who had spent their lives serving others finally began serving themselves. They built a civilization based on respect, cooperation, and genuine appreciation for each contribution. They created a society where no one's value was taken for granted. They became what they had always been, but now they did it for themselves. The galaxy learned its lesson the hard way. Respect cannot be demanded or assumed. It must be given freely, or eventually, those who deserve it will walk away. And when they do, the silence they leave behind speaks louder than any words.